We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
And now New Galaxy Broadcasting presents Inalienable and Free, Voice of the Coalition, a program addressing the grave challenges to human and citizen rights in America and the rest of the world. How can we, the people of Earth, take back the power and privileges granted to us by God and addressed so significantly in the Declaration of Independence? Our rights are inalienable, that is, given by God and incapable of being taken away from or given by another. These rights are the basis of liberty, the foundation of all life and happiness. The Coalition of Planetary Empowerment is an organization designed to give its members tools and information to empower them personally, in relationships and in business and employment, but also to give them a voice and the ability to help transform political and corporate governance to support the true needs and desires of people throughout the world. Inalienable and Free focuses on the need for government and corporate business interests to be responsive to the will and desire of their constituents and consumer shareholders. Hey, good morning. This is Johnny Bluestar, host of Inalienable and Free, Voice of the Coalition. I'm really happy to say I'm joined today with Don Newsom, owner of BBS Radio, who is and has been with me since the very beginning on BBS. Very active and always present in overseeing the production of Inalienable Free. And we're going to have a great conversation today. Good morning, Don.
Good morning. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Great to be with your audience again. And it's great to be here with you, Johnny. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. I guess we can say that this whole week has been extremely full of turmoil and changes, not necessarily for the best, but certainly to be interesting to be discussed.
Well, it's a little, right. Sorry, it is. It's an amazing week. Last 2 weeks have been crazy. That's why I've been looking forward to the show.
Well, we're actually going to do a very interesting thing for me, planning for this. We're going to actually discuss sort of solutions at a certain point. Solutions regarding the border situation, which Excellent. Is a mess.
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
I want to go back to sort of our central core purpose. Inalienable and Free is the voice of the Coalition for Planetary Empowerment, an organization in its very early stages that hopefully will result with a social network type infrastructure that will allow members to address issues in government, promote candidates for election, create initiatives that could eventually be turned into proposals for legislation, approach CEOs and other management in corporations to discuss issues with products and services and the position of corporations vis-a-vis the environment, consumer safety, shareholders' rights, as well as addressing issues involving the media with corporate management, reporters, and broadcasters. In other words, to give people a voice. The coalition will be mostly involved with topics related to citizen human rights in the broadest sense, including the right to education, health, and prosperity. We believe that these rights, including the primary rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, are aligned with the experience of the divine presence, the core spiritual experience alluded to in all major religions and positive nurturing spiritual movements and teachings. As in the oft-quoted phrase from the Declaration, the capstone phrase is probably, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Why all this spiritual stuff? Why not focus on creating a legal foundation for citizen human rights and then try and find a sufficient way to deploy it in a simple secular way based on finding a sufficient majority to take real control of an electoral system? And what is so damn important about the so-called American ideals and the American dream? We're of the opinion that man cut off from a conscious connection from God is like a sailor with a boat cut off from the sea, stuck off in some little rivulet in the middle of a lot of dry land. When you pilot your boat in the big ocean, you have a perspective that exceeds your perspective as an individual pilot, and when you work together with other pilots also in contact with the same ocean, your field of operation and navigation becomes more complex but infinitely more fruitful. That same kind of thinking appears in tribal communities like the Native American tribes, which might have a chief who's in charge of the tribe in general, a war chief in charge of war parties, and a medicine man who might operate in conjunction with other medicine people. There was a spiritual component to their decision-making. This is an analogy. What we are looking for in the coalition right now is helping to create paradigms for the United States, an essentially secular government from the same standpoint of spirit which guided the founding fathers, at least inspirationally, to formulate the sacred ideals and correlative rights of the American Republic, a government that allows for religious and personal freedom. We believe that the right ideals, the right concepts, and the correct manifestation can best come from citizens connected directly to spirit. And probably one of the failings of the American Republic. The American Republic is connected to ideals that were inspired, but never manifested fully through a conscious connection to spirit. But here, several hundred years later, we have a chance to do just that. As Don and I talked about last week, this show will at some point present some new paradigms in regards to borders, as we just mentioned. But as the week progressed, a few major things happened. One was the approval of Trump's travel ban by the Supreme Court of the United States. Let's hear from a clip from Vice News. That's N64.
The Supreme Court issued a closely watched decision today, in the final week of its term. The court ruled on Trump v. Hawaii, better known as the case about Trump's infamous travel ban. Now, this isn't the version of the travel ban that we all remember from the airport protests.
This is un-American. It's unconstitutional.
This revision, version 3, has been in place with very little fanfare since December, when the justices let it go into effect pending today's ruling. The issues in the case: does the president have the authority to ban people from specific countries from entering the United States? And is the ban a product of religious discrimination? In a 5-4 decision along ideological lines, the court upheld this version of the ban. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote that it was well within the president's authority to issue an executive order barring people from 5 Muslim-majority countries, plus North Korea and Venezuela, from entering the United States. It's a huge statement on presidential power.
So the Supreme Court ruling was a tremendous victory for this country and for the Constitution.
The challenge, brought by the state of Hawaii, several individuals, and a Muslim advocacy group, pointed to President Trump's retweets and campaign promises specifically to bar Muslims from entering the United States as a reason why the ban was unconstitutional. Remember this?
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Chief Justice Roberts addressed that and said that it wasn't the court's job to denounce the president's statements, and that he was only concerned with whether American security was a plausible justification. The majority decided it was. The justices also said that since the ban allows exceptions and waivers, that was crucial to deciding that it was constructed based on legitimate national security interests and holes in the overseas vetting process. But the ruling could still leave open some avenues to challenge the ban's scope.
This is supposed to be an emergency provision of the immigration law. The majority takes it to be temporary, in part because previous orders issued by other presidents have been temporary. So one thing that's open to the challengers is to press for how long can this remain on the books.
Now, both the majority and the minority considered whether this case resembled Korematsu versus the United States. That's the World War II era decision that said it was constitutional to hold Japanese Americans in internment camps. Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote that the majority deploys the same dangerous logic in the name of a superficial claim of national security, as the court did in that shameful decision. The majority tried to make sure people didn't tie the two cases together. Roberts wrote that Korematsu was morally repugnant and gravely wrong, but had nothing to do with the travel ban. It's also worth noting Justice Kennedy's warning. While he agreed with the decision, he wrote that, quote, the very fact that an official may have broad discretion free from judicial scrutiny, makes it all the more imperative for him or her to adhere to the Constitution and to its meaning and its promise. He added that an anxious world needs that commitment. A message pretty clearly intended for the President of the United States.
Well, you're dealing with Libya, Syria, Iran, Yemen, and Somalia, 2 Muslim countries, 2 non-Muslim countries, Venezuela and North Korea. There ain't many people coming here from North Korea, and as I've been told, not many from Venezuela either. In terms of Syria, we're involved with Syria militarily from time to time. Iran. Yemen is a country that is being attacked with our help by Saudi Arabia. And so Libya and Somalia, we have had presences or will have presence there. So you have this sort of strange combination of things, which are mostly Muslim countries. And the reasons for accepting the ban revolved around the ignoring of Trump's earlier prejudicial remarks against Muslims, including the original ban on all Muslims entering the country and the acceptance of his need for security. Well, Sonia Sotomayor, the Supreme Court Justice, gave a dissenting opinion. And I'll give you some examples of what she said. She was quoting from one famous case called Epperson versus Arkansas, which said the state may not adopt programs or practices which aid or oppose any religion. This prohibition is absolute in regards to the current Supreme Court decision supporting the ban, she says, insofar as the court has dissented from, quote, that clear command. This court has long acknowledged that governmental actions that favor one religion inevitably foster the hate and disrespect and even contempt of those who have contrary beliefs. Another point here that I think is important that she is concerned about was whether or not there was a real situation with these people. We already had a very strong national security type of protocol, and she said the government remains wholly unable to articulate any credible national security interest that will go unaddressed by the current statutory scheme absent the proclamation. And I don't think, Don, that that any of these countries, in terms of somebody coming here from those countries, really has been much of a problem in terms of terrorism.
I would disagree. I think Europe, I think if we look around the world and we see what's going on because of the open borders and Soros's money, and I do believe that because there was murders and death. They brought up many meetings throughout Europe by several people. They were all murdered. They all started talking about open borders in the early 2000s, and they were wiped away. And it has continued. Only it's become now more open. And to me, I see a lot of money behind this. And again, the majority, even though in what you were saying earlier,
I'm talking about in the United States. I don't think there's been a single situation where someone has come from these specific countries and had some kind of terrorist attack.
I think, well, when you're talking these paid provocateurs and terrorist attacks that we're getting right now, I think most of that in almost every case would be paid provocateurs. I've seen the ads. There's many of them. They run about $18, $20 an hour or more, and you can start getting paid to be a provocateur.
I'm sorry, I don't really know what you mean by a provocateur in this context. I'm talking about an actual event where people are killed.
Right. No, I believe that, you'd have to go a little smaller scale to the rapes, to the crime sprees, to some of
by people of these particular countries in the United States.
These are, from those news reports, a lot of these problems have been caused by illegal immigrants.
Well, I don't believe that there's been one situation from these specific countries where a terrorist came into the United States from that country, not someone who's lived here for a long time. I think there has been someone from Iraq or something, a few people maybe, right. But not from, I don't even think from these specific countries.
Well, from the ones again, it's kind of hard to tell. I don't know if we even get stats on exactly where these people are coming in from. I mean, we try to, but it's a little difficult because they're illegal. They're not really on the books. It's hard to say.
Well, I think that the terrorist attacks we're talking about are ones that are quite public. They're running cars into people, they're shooting people up.
Right.
And I don't think, but if you talk about Saudi Arabia, which we've given billions of dollars to for arms, they have a strong backdrop of supporting terrorism in different countries.
I agree. And our support of them is just, to me, ridiculous. I totally agree with you.
So anyway, I don't think that. I do think this is basically a religious ban, but I don't think it's really about.
Do religions mix? Can they mix? That's another question. Can they mix?
Of course.
Can all religions live together in harmony and peace?
Most religions have, at one point or another, as well as being antagonistic to each other.
Right.
Because I don't think it's a matter of religion; it's a matter of one's true heart, so to speak.
True.
I mean, the Moorish and the Jews got together.
I wish
and
that
then
were
again
true.
The Spanish. I'm sorry?
I said I wish that were true.
It was true.
I mean, I think it's more a matter of religious and state practices than our heart. In other words, many of these states and the people behind them feel they have a right to be here. And they follow the dictates of the money behind them. The people behind them say, yeah, you do have a right to be there, even though you don't.
I was talking about historically, many religions have worked together sometimes, and sometimes they are at war with each other.
Right. I would agree with that, but I think it's pretty difficult in many respects to mix religions when. And let me clarify that, because this is what I wanted to say afterwards. When those policies are part of the state. In other words, mixing state and religion. And we've done that here. This is where I feel Trump's way off base, way off base, because he's, making America all about Christianity and kind of, bringing that into the mainstay of the political arena. And I feel that's wrong, and that's what's really hurting this entire situation. And again, because of religious doctrines and ideologies. So Trump, he isn't the kind of person, I think, who's going to open his doors to a lot of different religious flavors like I would, maybe you would. And that's sad.
Well, I don't think that he himself, for someone who has just negotiated one of the biggest arms deals in the world with Saudi Arabia and danced with these people, right? Remember the dance with the sword dance? I don't think he personally is against Muslims. I think he uses that hatred of Muslims among his base to keep them going, and he made some promises to them. And I think this is part of his scheme for bond. His scheme is based on bonding people together because of hate.
I don't know. See, I'm more of a someone who sides with Trump. See, I don't feel that. I don't see it. And I'm voracious. When I go through the news and the clips, I'm voracious. I spend 4 to 8 hours a day going through news, reading the news all over the globe. Have since, 1999. I mean, voracious. And I've never felt that, Johnny. I don't feel that.
You don't feel what? That he's sort of an outsider to what he's doing.
Hate and trying to be divisive and
think of the things he said about Muslims, about Latinos, about all kinds of people. He's just. It's like
I've never, I've seen the media spin a lot of what he's stated, but I've never actually heard him state anything to me in that respect that was out of line. Yeah.
Well, I think you should just go on YouTube and you can find a lot of it. I've actually broadcast a lot of it in our programs. But I do think that he is basically, taking advantages of people's prejudices and turning against all kinds of people.
I don't know. It might seem like that, but I don't think that's the man he is. I think he's trying to bring the United States back to some semblance or resemblance to what it was, let's say, during the Reagan era. In other words, he's trying to bring back some form of national policies that will actually protect this country, its citizens, its trade, its finance and commerce. And he's quite the negotiator. Yeah, I do. Yeah. Yeah, I really do.
That's interesting.
And because, when I look on the global stage and I see all this happening in the last week or two, come on. I mean, if people, it's Trump. Oh, he's Trump doing that. Trump's doing this. Then I think, okay, why did it ramp up so fast? And this is continuously like this. I'm just giving an example. The most recent one, it ramps up so fast, and they come against him and form coalitions against him, let's say. And it comes right out of the blue. And then it dominates the mainstream media, and then everybody jumps onto the bandwagon. They say that's the way it is.
He's pulling out of gigantically major agreements that dozens of countries have come together in, and just immediately destroying those agreements.
Thank heavens, in my opinion, that he's renegotiating these trade deals. I believe him when he's...
Well, I'm not so much talking about the trade deals.
Well, it always comes down to the finance and the commerce. It always comes down to the money, and those are very big issues, and they will permeate the other issues.
Don't you think? When you look at an action like what Sessions just did, which is pulling children away from their parents, and not even documenting carefully where they were, or if they're documenting and not releasing.
Now, who do we believe on that score, though? Who do we believe? Because there's
I believe the courts, and I believe that multiple people have gone in and watched things and looked at what they're doing.
Right.
The pictures are extraordinary.
Right, and many of those pictures, they say, were from prior administrations, the Obama and the Clinton era.
No, that's not possible.
Now, there might be a couple states.
I'm talking about pictures of living senators going there and banging on the doors trying to get in, or people in the news actually getting into these places right now.
Right. No, I understand. And I've watched some of those reports, but I think, again, that's part of past administration issues that are trying to be cleared up now.
They didn't separate children.
I believe they did. I think they separated them. I think it was policy. I think Clinton and Obama decided to continue those policies. And I think that, that's the thing about the news. I mean, we're kind of like on a tangent here, because what's the truth and what isn't? There's been so many lies out there. We almost have to follow our hearts in some of this and read between the lines.
I think I'm following my heart in saying that although there was these rules, the potential for doing it, these people did not do it. 2,500 people that we know of were separated. I mean, 2,500 children.
Past policies that now are trying to be renegotiated, and I think he's having a tough time renegotiating it because there's so much money. I wish I had your faith, man.
I do. It's wonderful.
I think we're heading in the right direction now, and I truly would like to see this. Well, I shouldn't say that because I'm stepping a little bit out of bounds there, but we are heading in a better direction. Let's say a better direction.
I really honestly think that most of our civil liberties are being taken away. I think our minorities are all being attacked. I think that the man has no real belief in law and order, and I think he actually is he's. Why would he when there's like in Charlottesville, when there's this hate group obviously out front? Why wouldn't he say anything? Why would he say, well, there's some good people on both sides when we're talking about neo-Nazis? I don't get it.
Well, hey. Some of the things he says are profoundly stupid. I hear you. I mean, I've noticed that he'll say one thing, flip another, and I don't know often enough where he's coming from.
We'll
that's the
Syria,
truth. But
we'll go out of Syria. We'll attack Syria.
Right.
We'll leave Syria. I mean,
he leaves you guessing. He does leave you guessing every now and again.
Well, Don, I'm gonna continue on here for a minute because
Okay.
we got a lot of stuff that we do agree with that we need to cover, I guess. I want to say about citizenship in a sovereign country is primarily granted automatically if you're born in a country, and visitors, potential residents, and immigrants applying for citizenship go through a certain procedure. Citizens have special rights. For instance, a citizen is automatically granted the right to Social Security and Medicare. And although non-citizens and residents may be eligible at least for some medical attention and financial relief, it could be a different, often more cumbersome and more risky process. But given the equality phrase that all men are created equal, does being a citizen of a sovereign nation preclude other residents and immigrants in various statuses from having certain basic rights? And when they come to the border, shouldn't they retain those basic rights? So I'm going to say there's three types of identity. There's personal identity, there's citizenship, which is having a sovereign nation that you belong to, and there's a planetary identification, which is basically that everything we do in a way can affect everyone else, and we should be aware of and concerned about the rights, privileges, and the responsibilities of other people, even if we can't help them directly.
Right. There's a point there. It's a good point. I mean, we are global citizens, and to be restricted on one part of the globe versus another, it's a little harsh, and I hope one day we can solve that problem. I truly
we're going to try to present a way of doing that.
All right.
And
that's really the bottom line, isn't it? That's one of the biggest issues of our day, and it's been one of the biggest issues throughout one empire after another. Actually, that's been a primary issue. If we can solve it, hey, Nobel Peace Prize coming.
All right. I want to point out that there has been this travel ban that came around the same time that all these children were being separated from their parents, and so because of that, both of these things came into the forefront of the news cycle at basically the same time. And so I want to point out that when citizens come in, they're at the border. That's a real border, but they're either in or out. But when they petition our government or any other government to come in, come as an immigrant, even if they're not there, they're either going to go in or go out, or give a temporary trial period. Right. So that's kind of a virtual border. Right. So I think that what we're trying to talk about is both kinds of borders and how to deal with them. So in our discussion that we're going to have, we'll be talking about border empowerment centers or communities, which is an imaginative solution to the problem of monitoring borders. But this will apply both to the physical and virtual borders. We'll be talking about cooperative trade zones, a rather large idea, which appears to me a necessity in order to effect empowerment centers. There needs to be a constructive economic paradigm to put things in perspective. So let's talk about economics. In my view, there's no such thing as pure socialism and pure capitalism. The United States is obviously a blend of both systems, with Social Security and Medicare being the most obvious. But we also have universities that are some of them are public, K-12 education, public libraries, physical infrastructure, water, sewer systems, public parks, public police forces. Then there's some things that I don't really feel comfortable with, like privatizing jails. They used to be all basically public. And but basically, I think in a certain sense, theoretically, we have a nice blend. What do you think of that?
Well, what was the question?
That most countries have a blend of socialism and capitalism.
Yeah, in a loose sense of the word, sure, yeah.
So when you talk about capitalism, there's a subcategory called, sometimes pejoratively called, predatory capitalism. And I think often when people are talking about capitalism, they're really talking about, in a more fair way, countries competing with one another. But they're not using, bad tactics.
Right.
They're not playing the game in a bad way.
Right.
But I think that, so that's similar to teams in a sports game competing with one another, but willing to play fair, and congratulate anyone who wins.
Right.
So I think those two poles are really not the answer. I think what we need is something I would call cooperative capitalism.
Yeah, that might look like putting a ceiling or a floor, in other words, on the amount of money somebody can actually make. How much wealth can you hoard? And believe me, I know this. It sounds a little weird, and my brother and I were discussing that a while back, and I always thought you shouldn't put a limit on somebody's ability to create wealth. That just doesn't make sense, because that person is going after it and deserves it. And I've always believed that. But I've come to believe, with the kind of money that's out there in these families, passing it along, and the illegal means with which they obtain greater and greater amounts of money at the expense of everybody else, I think we should consider some form of a floor or ceiling on the amount of money a person can actually have. Assets.
Well,
property,
in this particular paradigm, it's not so much that we're looking at a floor. I mean, that may happen, but the point is that, let me describe this. In cooperative capitalism,
predatory capitalism, though, when you put some sort of limits on that, that might be the beginning of preventing that sort of predatory.
Well, I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but what I'm focusing on is when certain companies, certain people, certain countries, that they look at each other as being part of the same team. They're all interested in everybody's prosperity,
right.
Not putting any necessary limits on it, except ones that actually sort of exist just by nature of what they're doing. But they basically are loving thy neighbor as thyself. And so in this way, their attitude is different, because they're saying, well, it's like you and me getting together in a certain way. Like we get together and we decide to open a lemonade stand or whatever it is. And, we're friends. So we're not trying to get more money from each other, but we're collectively trying to make as much money as we can, right?
Right. Right.
So that's a different attitude.
Is.
That's putting us all in the same planet, as this is our playing field as the planet, not just our country, but we are, we're separated both as individuals, as citizens, and we're separated in terms of sort of teams. But these are teams that care about each other, and we're not looking for win-loss things. We're looking for win-win things.
Yeah, we might want to consider. We might want to consider those kind of relationships, more open relationships with those borders around us and countries around us, and then feel it out and see how it goes, and then spread those kind of values. But we can't do it globally, because everybody doesn't have that heart. People just, it'd be great to think they are all love thy neighbor people, but unfortunately, the state ideologies in many of these countries have a mix of, again, religion with their state, or cultures in their state that would be very destructive or harmful to other countries, cultures, people, and their state. So
I don't think it's possible to do this now.
Yeah,
I wasn't really trying
small
to.
scale would
I
be
was
great.
saying, okay, so I'm trying to identify the problem. Really, the problem is that we're competing. I mean, when you're competing with each other and you have nuclear weapons that can virtually destroy the world, either by mistake or by any kind of real serious exchange, and then you're doing the same thing with money. Right. You're trying to get all the marbles on your. You're trying to get all the marbles on your table, with its petrodollars or going to
the most toys.
Yeah, you want to get it on your side, and or you're going to, you'll print more money, so you'll change the rate of inflation, and you'll affect another country's currency.
It's predatory, right.
So it's like
it's manipulated,
stupid, isn't it? I mean, it's when it comes down to it, how does it help? It helps certain number of corporations and a certain number of people, but it drives everything to that 1% situation.
Right, and now it doesn't have to. I don't think capitalism has to work that way. I think it is working that way currently because of the corruption and particularly corruption by government. But it doesn't have to be that way. I think
that's why I'm calling it cooperative capitalism.
Yeah.
I don't believe that the answer is to give everything to the state.
Right.
And then the state is sort of a separate entity than from the people.
Right.
And which is what really has happened in what we would normally call now, these are communist countries. They're really dictatorships.
Well, the United Nations was a good idea. It was a good idea. But when you got all those nations together and you stuck a little money in the mix, look what happened. And it continues to happen, with one, say, coalition or another. It just does. It's hard to get around.
It's corruption at the top.
It's corruption at the top. It's kind of like you and I were talking in the past. I always thought a good idea was, yes, have a global council. Global council would be great, but it would be an arbitration council. And that council would be there in case countries get into, some sort of a snit with each other, and they help arbitrate and resolve that. But I don't think that this global council should interfere with local and regional local politics. I think we might have a caller. I'll be right back. All right, Johnny, we do have Lynn Mystic Healer with us on line 1.
Terrific. Let's speak to her.
Hey.
Hi, Lynn.
Yes, hello. Thank you for what you're doing. I just wanted to mention, I wondered when you're talking about capitalism and capital, socialist, cooperative capitalism mix and what have you, and how about taxing Wall Street transactions? Why aren't the banks being taxed? I don't really understand why every single millisecond of Wall Street transactions aren't being taxed, these bankers. And I also know that when people know better, they do better. And you talk about in Michael Moore's movie, everyone, where to invade next. They go through all these different ways that they were able to get the bankers out of their politics in Iceland. Then they also show a section on your cap on free trade, which is phenomenal, and how well it works for the company and the people involved. And anyway, it goes on into all kinds of restorative justice movements and, drug policies out of Portugal that are really working, jobs, not jails kind of programs. Anyway, I just know that all these government policies could really help bring our USA together with a new kind of focus, intentional focus that could really help us unite our USA. So thank you. So everyone can be inalienable and free. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lynn.
That's great. Well, I guess, Don, let's take a little bit of a break now, and let's play M25, M26, and C7.
Zabe Nathan came here from France, seeking work as an actor and musician in Hollywood. Now he and his wife, Bonnie Blazak, write unusual, socially impactful songs. Hear Threshold radio shows Zabe Nathan and Bonnie Blazak awakened songwriters, and the controversial 2-part show, Who's Minding the Planet. Find those shows in our thresholdradio.com archives as well as SoundCloud and YouTube. And here's a beautiful ballad by Zabe Music called Believe.
Where to start? Stay strong and keep loving our hearts. forsake, forget who we are, as a future and past are written in the stars. Every day of our life we should pray to the sky. We are one, we are love, you and I. The greed and the wars and corruption will cease, but we will see much loss, and for that we will grieve. In the end it is love we'll receive, and we mustn't forsake.
Dr. Hugo Rodier is a medical doctor trained in nutritional medicine with a special interest in intestinal disorders. You may schedule a consult via Skype or telephone by calling 801-898-3317 or via email by accessing his website, hugorodier.com, HUGORODIER.com. No insurance accepted, but a form is available to apply for reimbursement from your insurance, except for Medicare. Dr. Rodier speaks English, French, and Spanish.
Well, I can understand that. I don't like them either.
We are back, folks. All right.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about, some of the effects of these new trade policies that we were talking about. Well, the little thing about the trade wars. Let's talk about a couple of things related to them. Let's play N66.
We want to make it easier for businesses to create more jobs and more factories in the United States. And you're a great example of it.
You're a great example of it. That was just last year at the White House. The president holding up a quintessential American brand, motorcycle maker Harley-Davidson, as just the type of company he wants to help. Well, check your inbox, Mr. President. Harley-Davidson now announcing it plans to move some operation out of the U.S. because of the tariffs. So, is this America First trade policy going exactly as planned? Joining me right now, CNN correspondent Allison Cossack with much more on this. Allison, what is Harley-Davidson doing?
Okay, so in this SEC filing from today, we're learning about what Harley-Davidson is doing. It is going ahead and shifting production of its motorcycles it makes for European customers, literally moving it out of the United States and setting up shop overseas to avoid the tariff and ultimately save money and customers. Now, we learned that Harley-Davidson is making this drastic move to literally hold on to its second biggest sales market, and that's Europe. And this is after the EU raised tariffs from 6% to 31% on motorcycles that are exported from the U.S. Now, Harley says the tariff raises the price by about $2,200 on every motorcycle that's sold in Europe. So that really cuts its competitive strength in Europe if their motorcycles are more than what's already on the market. So you look at the security filing, Harley-Davidson said this. It said it believes that the tremendous cost increase, if it's passed on to its dealers and retail customers, it would wind up having an immediate and lasting detrimental impact to its business in the region. So instead of raising prices, which Harley says it's not going to do, the company has decided, you know what? We're better off over the next 18 months literally moving our production facilities of the motorcycles to avoid the tariffs. The way Harley sees it, Europe is a critical market for the company. You look at last year, it did 15% of its business there. 40,000 motorcycles were sold. So for now, Harley is basically going to eat the higher tariff cost. The company says it's going to take a hit of $30 million to $45 million for the rest of the year. And if you look at the full year, the impact could be as high as $100 million. So those kinds of losses, Kate, are expected to eat into profit for the company. It is the reason we are seeing shares of Harley-Davidson right now tanking 5% because they're going to be struggling to literally move that facility and try and pay for this tax that's going to be placed on their motorcycles overseas.
Well, what do you think of that situation as a result of these retaliatory trade war situations?
I think we're going to see more of that. I think there's big negotiations going on with these multinational corporations, and a lot of the CEOs that are in bed with many of these corporations, I think it's a negotiation. I think it's going to continue to ramp up until these issues are solved. And this is just one of the issues we're going to have to deal with, probably with several more corporations that are international in scope. Yeah.
I mean, I think the retaliation from Ottawa is like an attempt at an equal retaliation of $21 billion.
Right.
Well, here's another what I thought was interesting. This is an article on CNN Money, actually. The title of the article was U.S. Trade War Will Spill into Other Asian Economies. Just read it. It's fairly short. A worsening tit for tat would be bad news for export powerhouses such as Taiwan, South Korea, and Malaysia, which sell goods to China that are used to make products exported to the United States, from automobiles to consumer electronics. These are industries that require technologies that come from many different directions, says Raymond Sang, a Shanghai-based partner at consultant Bain and Company. The supply chain is very complex. This interwoven trade is essential to regional economies. Asia is an export-dependent region, and for many economies, exports are an engine for growth. No doubt about it, if this thing accelerates, it will have a material impact in the region, particularly on Taiwan. Tech components such as computer chips are among the products which are most vulnerable to trade turmoil. That would put the island of Taiwan in a precarious position if the U.S.-China fight intensifies. Taiwan is a big supplier of components to mainland China, where they are used to make smartphones and other electronic devices, which are shipped for sale in the United States. In total, these exports make up almost 2% of Taiwan's gross domestic product, according to research firm Capital Economics. Taiwan stands to lose the most in the trade war, said senior Asia economist Gareth Leather. If demand falls for Chinese smartphones, demand for Taiwanese components will suffer too. So that's just another consequence. I mean, we're dealing with all of Europe, with Canada, Mexico, and China. That's a lot of countries, right? And then but there's a lot of spin-offs from that. Is it so clear that when you do something like this, that you're not can you really predict what's going to happen?
Well, the bottom line with these trade deals, I think, is, just to preface all this, is that these countries feel, because of our dominance with the dollar, that it's an unfair situation. And here's Trump trying to create fair trade deals with these countries who believe that we've had an unfair advantage for a long, long time. I think that's kind of the issue you're dealing with. Some people want to right those wrongs where others just want to settle the playing field. So, you're dealing with, maybe more than two camps on that score. But,
right. That's right.
Yeah.
I think I don't think what happened at that G7 summit was pretty good. I don't think it was good. I don't think the things that Trump said about the head of Canada were really very good things. Do you?
Well,
Trudeau,
I never liked.
You have to call him a weak man.
Well, I don't like Trudeau at all. I never liked his family. In 1977, when we moved from Canada to the U.S., the main reason my family left because it was Trudeau, the older Trudeau, and the new Democrat Republican, and they wanted to get out of there as fast as they could because the corruption was so high and so extreme in the business world, and that's what they were in. They decided to get out of there. Now, is Justin any better? Well, look, what happened after he and Trump spoke, they had, not very much to say. They talked a little bit together, but it seems like Trump might have slighted him or snubbed him just a bit, really didn't open up to him as much as he maybe should have initially. And then that later led to Justin snubbing Trump. Now, I don't know who did it first. I think if you were to put those two in a room, they would probably get along great. But once they left that room, they're going to tote their party lines because that's what they think they're getting paid to do. Tough for me. I don't know if there's real animosity between them. Although if I were to, say, hey, are they both principled and charactered individuals? I would say that Trump holds himself, has more character, more honor, and more integrity than Justin by far. But that's my opinion. I haven't been analyzing a lot of Canadian politics lately because I just think the Trudeau family is rotten to the core, to the very fabric of their family. But that's my thoughts because of my upbringing and, where I corralled my mind, let's say.
Well, I have no comment about Trudeau because I really don't know anything about him. Yeah. I just think that Trump has a history of really grievously insulting people. And I don't know, even if you dislike a person who's on the who's the head of a country, that you should really approach it that way.
I think it was more that Trump and they were in that meeting, and that from what I understood reading maybe alternative reports was they got along famously before, and then after they all left to their own respective countries again, Trudeau made an about face and snubbed the president, and that's, in my opinion, likely true considering what I feel and understand of Justin. I think he instigated that, and I think Trump probably felt, hey, this, we got along great, and then the next moment, Justin spitting in his face, basically. And same way, I think, with some of the other leaders of a couple of the other countries did exactly the same thing. It was a great meeting. Trump thought it was great. Next, they turn around and they spit in the face of the president just to create this global antagonism. There's a lot of money. There's so much money moving, and the big finances that run the world, they have a certain open border desire, and for their own machinations, don't think it's for the love of the people. You'd be mistaken. So because of their own machinations, these things are starting to ensue. And how are you going to change that? I mean, if let's say 80% or 60% of the world's money doesn't like you and wants to move in this direction, and wants to create a global chaotic situation that they can undermine at every turn and play with. Well, where was I going with this? Basically, I'll leave it at that. I'll just leave it at that because I'd start to dribble on that.
Well, we'll take a break for a little while for C2 and C11, a little bit of
you got it.
A little bit of a break, and then we're going to go into solutions.
You got it.
My company, New Galaxy Enterprises, is a California corporation specializing in the creation of media and promotional content. We are focused on original, innovative projects that are good for humanity. These projects could be nonfiction books or novels, fictional screenplays or documentary content, websites and website content, commercial advertising content for print, audio, or video products on the internet, television, or radio, musical scores for advertising, television, or film, video, audio editing, etc. We want to promote products and projects that support the environment, encourage a healthy experience in living, developing, nurturing, and useful technology, and offering platforms for positive, socially constructive entertainment or informative, transformative media. Our experience in creating a variety of products like this is rather vast, and we offer client-based and collaborative products, as well as the opportunity of active investors to join us in the creation and promotion of proprietary products, some of which are in latter stages of development. For more information, go to www.newgalaxyenterprises.com. That's www.newgalaxyenterprises.com.
If you're interested in talking to us, just fill out the contact sheet and we will get back with you.
This is Johnny Bluestar, CEO of New Galaxy Enterprises, a media content development company. Initially, I wanted to be a playwright, but once in college, I fell in love with movies and have been writing my own and for clients for many years. No, I'm not entrenched in Hollywood. But I think if you look at my samples, you can determine if I can capture the drama and power of your idea. I'm up to refining your work to professional quality. I've worked on dramatic films, comedy, science fiction, documentaries, and even musicals. I have several books published now that are the beginning of book and film franchises. To learn more about New Galaxy, see samples of our work, or talk to us about your project, please go to www.newgalaxyenterprises.com and fill out the contact form.
All right. Well, imagine that businesses and government actually wanted to cooperate with each other, and the whole world wasn't hanging under the threat of mutually assured technology, mutually assured destruction by one of the most wasteful and dangerous technologies ever created. There would be an entirely different attitude and a form of planning desirous of creating the maximum benefit for consumers and businesses worldwide, but also for the entire human family as citizens of planet Earth. So events of the southern border have now become explosive, primarily because of the outrage stirred by the separation of at least 2,500 children from their families. Some administrators of this policy are being hounded by their opponents and have had trouble eating casually in some restaurants. Whether this type of approach is right or wrong, the forcible separation of children from their parents with the possibility that they will lose their children forever is a crime deeper than that could be simply defined as such by secular law. Still, the magnitude of people taking perilous journeys with or without children, fleeing possible murder, continual theft of property, joblessness, even human trafficking and other forms of criminality, and then subjected to handcuffs and imprisonment does not meet my criteria for loving my neighbor.
Yeah.
I hear that's you. What I see right now. I see something really.
That's what everybody sees, though. That's what everybody wants you to see. That's what the money, that open border society, and a lot of this money.
I mean, honestly, you don't really think that 25. The government has said 2,500 people, children were taken. That's not something that someone else said. They were taken. And they've only restored 500 of them. They're under a court order now. They haven't denied that they've done that. Do you think they have done?
You know, I think a lot of these policies have been the precedence has been set in earlier administrations, and now the negotiations have started to solve that problem, and it's a tough one, and that both sides are coming at it in very opportunistic
he said,
ways.
I can't do anything. It was the law. I can't do its executive order. And then a few days later,
true. Again, Trump keeps everybody guessing, and I think that also. And I hate to condone lies. I hate to condone lies.
Wouldn't you say that's a lie?
Right.
I say that they didn't. They did it on purpose.
I hate to condone lies. I do. But he's in a tough spot, and he needs...
Tough spot about taking 2,500 children from people coming largely for asylum?
Yeah, I don't think... I don't think
you have to separate their children and say...
I don't believe that's his policies. I honestly don't believe those are his policies.
You don't think it's his policies?
No, I don't.
You really... Okay, well, I think it's a matter of you just taking a look, or both of us taking a look and doing more research.
Right. I think these are policies from past administrations that are being now negotiated.
Everything that I know
tool in his book
suggests that they were possible policies, but they were not effective.
I think they were very effective back then, and they were hushed up by the political establishment in an extreme degree.
Well, how do you know that?
Well, some of the reports that I'd read from various media services, just like you'd get your information from, espoused exactly that.
Well, I'd like to see some of yours. Mine are all over the news.
Right. Well, I don't buy into mainstream media at all. I think they are, like Trump says, completely fake news. They make it up as they go, and they twist everything, and they are the enemy of the people.
I think there are 300 marches going on today in cities throughout the United States.
Right, and you see all the Craigslist ads and the other ads, and they've increased the rate at which they're paying provocateurs now. They went from 13, 15, 18 to 20 with accommodations and lunch and everything else. You get heck, it's so much money. It's above minimum wage in such large degree. I can't believe there's not more people jumping into these.
You honestly think that the people?
I think in very large part, yes. I think in very large part, you get a few paid provocateurs, enough of them, and they create, like Maxine Waters said, a crowd, and then we push back. I think it's exactly.
That's really fascinating, man. I am so glad to be talking to you. Well, I'm going to continue on here. The southern border of the United States is not the only border problem in the world. There's an obvious polarization between those who wish to welcome the refugees in so many different countries and those whose solution is Spartan and indifferent, often based on a feeling of nationalistic and ethnic exceptionalism. Considering the reality of protecting borders, is there some kind of a different paradigm that could work? The problem at our southern border grew simultaneously with the escalating trade tensions, as mentioned. It appears that we now have this trade war, as we've discussed, between all these different countries. The inability of countries to distinguish between their obligation to protect their true sovereign identity and provide for their citizens accordingly, and the need to see the validity to exercise responsibility over events outside their country which demand their attention and responsiveness. From a truly spiritual perspective, no country is an island. No country stands alone. That's why this is the point where, as Americans, Mexicans, or any other kind of nationality, our planetary citizenship must kick in. Refugees come in all sizes, and their efforts often end in chaos and pain. And yes, we want to end this, but not in the wrong way. The answer is not capitulation to some kind of borderless world engineered and controlled by a ruthless dictatorial central government, but rather to respond to a higher calling for a way of looking at other countries and governments with respect for their different identities, but also with respect for their rights to prosperity and happiness. Trade wars, as we experience now, is because of a polarizing psychology which emphasizes insulated and selfish competition as a result of countries' short-sightedness in looking at the greater advantage of utilizing cooperative capitalism to maximize their collective prosperity. So our promise today, Don, was to lay down a developing paradigm that could create better results economically for all countries.
I actually like that idea. I think you and I could hammer this out, and I got a couple ideas.
Okay. Well, let's go for it. We'll go on with mine in a minute. Why don't you hit me with some of yours?
Well, I think there's a couple ways. Like I was saying, first, if we want to step into this global citizenship, and we want to do it in not just a spiritual way, because a lot of people, they don't have that spiritual bent, which I have. But I feel that if we step in this in a very gentle way, for instance, number one, we have a global arbitration panel, and those people will not be allowed to earn extra money, have investments, or have anything beyond what they've been given to be, their pay for being on the global arbitration panel. I don't believe we should allow them in any sort of global investments or any sort of financing, period. So they would have to somehow be stepped out of that bailiwick in order to be able to be uncorruptible in that situation, or at least somewhat. The other way, I think, is stepping into a total global citizenship would be to start it on a small scale, like maybe this panel or countries get together and they say, okay, we're going to try a global coalition between these 6 countries, and we're going to have limited, like we're going to make you a global citizen. You can come into these countries and you can do X, but you can only do X for so long. And then you got to show that you can provide an income, or you are a part of the economy, and you are creating more stable and robust environment instead of breaking it down. So maybe in limited capacity, we hand out global citizenship cards in a few countries. We limit that interaction in some degree, and we then step it up and grow that sort of situation as we roll. Because ultimately, like you say, we're dealing with countries and people that have so much power, wealth, and destructive capability that the world isn't safe if a few radicals decide to go half-cocked and start nuking or destroying their own nuclear facilities to get at another country. So it really needs to be tried with kids' gloves, baby steps. But I think it's doable, but you got to get a few countries that are willing to do that, almost like Canada and the U.S., where at one point, hey, citizens could go back and forth readily without too much border interaction. And believe me, I went through it for years, and they just wave you through. It's only when you came to the U.S. side they started messing with you. The Canadian side, you could just roll right in, right? And I think and some of those areas could be looked at where we actually can have more citizen exchange students on a much greater scale than we have now. We could see if these cultures and these people from different countries can work together in such a way as to make it advantageous. Those might be a couple ways to do it. Open borders, just paying for open borders and then trying to force that upon a country is disastrous.
I think it's really, really dangerous. And look at what's happened so far.
I was telling you at the break, my family lives in Austria. They're in their 80s, late 80s. They've been in Austria their whole life, and they've never experienced this. I mean, if you were, like when I was there, the cops came once because I was drunk. I was banging on somebody's door, woke somebody up because I didn't know where I was. I was lost, and the police came, and they drove me back to my grandmother's, and it shocked everybody. For 30 years, 40 years, I kept hearing about that. And, oh, my gosh, and you were and still never seen a police officer in our neighborhood. Well, once Merkel decided to do what she did in Germany, Austria had a lot, they had their own issues and they were trying to deal with it too, but unfortunately it caught them off guard. And now the crime rate from immigrants is to the point where they're finding break-ins, murders, rapes, car break-ins, home break-ins, beat-downs, and it's on a regular occurrence. They're frightened. They're so frightened that I wanted to fly my kids down there, and I have two older teenage kids that wanted to go to Europe for the first time and meet my family before the last couple of them died. And they said, no, don't. We love you.
That's a shame,
we just want to die. We just want to die peacefully, or do not come up. It's that bad. We would never want you to see Austria like this anymore. It's really that bad. I was shocked. Okay, because they have personal phone calls with me to people I've known my whole life. And they're not liars. They're very, in fact, timid people. And have a strong character and spirituality to them as well. So, when I hear those sorts of things, what's going on? Do I want that here in the United States? Not even on a limited scale for now. I think it needs to be done the right way. This open borders by Soros, and really is Soros, folks. He's not a myth. Soros is not a myth. That kind of money moving to radicalized countries in order for their own gain, really for his own personal gain, and those of others, Volcker and others of the big money clique, right? That. And I don't want to see that here. I moved here to the United States to get away from all the stupid policies and crime. And it comes back down to the open border situation, how people feel about that. So it is a big issue. You notice it's the main issue today. It truly is. It's not so much the immigrant children. That's just a byproduct. It really comes down to open borders. Period.
Well, we're going to discuss a little bit more about solving that problem.
Right. Fantastic.
I hope we have enough time.
Oh, we got a little while.
The thing is, whatever we're going to do, we can't do it we can't solve the problem with borders without solving more or less some of the aspects of the global economic problem.
Right.
We believe that the border solution we recommend must coexist with much larger changes in the concept of global commerce.
Right.
Accordingly, we suggest the development of cooperative trade zones throughout the world where countries agree to proportionally develop and manufacture products depending on the resources, talent, and interests of different countries. As in the past, categories of trade, like, for instance, building and manufacturing cars, would not be exclusively tied to one country, but factors of proposed demand and capacity to manufacture would configure into the creation of these zones with meticulous respect to the various countries and resources around the world. The result would be in a kind of global economic democracy, require the kind of attention, willingness to compromise, forward-thinking concern for both parties' own business and country, as well as those participating in the entire planetary economy. In other words, we're not looking at competing exactly with each other, but cooperating. Let one country build this, another country build that.
I like that idea because ultimately the resources belong to the people of the planet. And,
yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly. We're not trying to break down the sovereignty. They still have their sovereignty, but they can. But look at what's happening now. German companies are coming here and building cars here, right?
Right.
I mean, it's happening anyway, but it's not happening in a real cooperative way. It's all messed up.
It is. These companies.
And I think the answer is like more between the companies and the countries. It's not just like a big, broad type of economic planning with some economic god sitting there telling people what to do. It's everybody kind of negotiating for each other's mutual advantage.
Well, the scum, let's say, from society has risen to the top into these positions, and politics is so corrupt these days, even in these other countries, to think that they're going to negotiate on behalf of the people. I haven't seen that.
Because this can't be done. This can't be done from the top down.
Right.
It actually has to be done from the bottom up.
Bingo. Right.
So
right.
what you need to do is create a group of people. I mean, a massive, eventually, group of people who really are politically, socially, and maybe even spiritually together. Who can work this out?
Well,
right now there are companies that they're practicing conscious business. They are trying to do things like that.
Right.
But there are a very small number of those companies.
That's right. Yeah.
I would say cooperative trade zones would not be like free trade zones, which also have been characterized as being lopsided and not free, and often favoring multinational corporations and neglecting the welfare of participating nations like us. The concept of free trade zones has always been somewhat deceptive, and whether or not, even in its purer form, neglects the kind of customized contextuality of cooperative trade zones. Free trade zones exist in the world of competitive capitalism. Cooperative trade zones seek to ensure profitability exists in all the world planetary economic system. The idea would be to create trading opportunities based on truly fair and balanced criteria. This would require a completely different psychology of commerce, where companies really looked at each other a bit more in the spirit of joint ventures for the sake of mutual prosperity rather than as objects for conquest and destruction. So that's sort of like what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And we are talking about maybe some profit sharing. So if somebody wins in this area of the country and the other person's been trying real hard, maybe the profit can go sort of both ways. I'm not talking about equal profit sharing, but contextual profit sharing, just so that everyone tries to maintain a certain level of prosperity if they're all acting in goodwill. Also, another part of it, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I really do think you have to prevent oligopoly and monopoly.
You do.
Have to have some kind of antitrust aspect to it.
I mean, isn't Bezos worth over 140 billion now?
Yeah.
I mean, just a few years ago, he was 60, 40, then 80, 120, 144 billion. I mean, whoa. And to be able to control economies to the point the government has to deal with you in a radical way, or give you favors, or say you don't have to pay tax or sales, or you don't have to abide by various rules that others have to abide by because you're so large. Yeah, that stinks. But
I think it's led to massive poverty, government corruption, and reduction of the intellectual freedom to create things that work, rather than to maintain.
Well, why don't we just turn these big companies like these major conglomerates? Hey, this is a radical idea. I don't know if it'll work, but throwing it out there, why don't they at a certain point say, okay, this a lot of this wealth has to be handed off to the individual shareholders and not the administrative staffs and the CEOs and so on. More and more of it has to go to the people at a certain point.
Oh, that's interesting. Yes.
Yeah, when you make a certain
and there
point.
there are some movements, I believe, in trying to get shareholders more responsibility.
Right.
But I don't think that they reach that level that you're talking about.
Right.
So there's the other part of it. Now we'll get to the borders finally. Which would mean that if you had this kind of economy, we're talking about border empowerment communities. And this isn't often in the area where borders geographically exist, but if it's not possible, then in other areas. In other words, these communities would exist usually at the borders, but maybe not, because sometimes the borders wouldn't allow that. Border empowerment communities would be created through an international agency that would, with the agreement of sovereign nations of the world, permit the settlement of refugees in a border empowerment community throughout the world, but not necessarily in the adjacent country where refugees are starting to live.
Why can't we create an area in each country? Like, look, okay, we're going to donate an area half the size of Washington to this open border policy, not open borders like that's trying to be forced upon us, but a more open situation with limits, of course.
That's right. Yeah, we're talking about an international, an area that's
every
controlled
country should maybe do that. Relegate a certain area to test it out instead of throwing it on all the people. Maybe just a small area and seeing how it goes from there. Like
I have to tell you, something really strange happened, about this. Because during this time, you remember the problem with Italy and these boats trying to get in there and all the problems with those type of immigrants, right?
Right.
And Italy was refusing to let them in. I don't know if they eventually did, but there was going to be a summit, sort of an EU agreement, and Italy refused to do anything unless the European Union, agreed to deal with the migrant issue, and they did. I don't know how good it is, but one of the aspects of it, and I know we're kind of running out of time, aren't we?
We got a good 20 minutes yet.
Okay, so let's get into that for a second. I thought it was really strange because they actually have done something like this. They have done it in the past, and I think they're going to do it more in the future. In other words, just because a refugee comes into this country doesn't mean that they're going to be going into the country they're choosing, because the country might not be able to accept them. They'll be going somewhere else. So,
well, I have an unbefristet visa. It's called a forever visa. My grandparents and then my mother obtained that for my brother and I. It's a forever visa, and I can actually go to Europe, work and live there. My brother and I might be one of the last two to obtain one of those.
Where did it come from? I mean, from a country or from?
Right, from Austria. And they actually, in my passport, it says unbefristetet visa, which is a forever visa. And it allows me, again, to live and work there at any time. And from what I understand, all of the European Union, because of their situation. So that's been interesting. It took quite some doing for them to achieve that, to actually get that, but they managed to do it. I've never used it, but I have it. I think
that's a good example of it, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of a kind of an international
visa.
It's
right.
I mean, of an international solution.
And they could probably revoke it at any time if they chose to, if I did something wrong, which but yeah.
Well, let's hear a little bit about the European migrant deal. Why don't we hear N65?
Joining me on set is Chris Moore from our International Affairs Desk. Welcome, Chris. Tell us more about the details. What came out of this summit?
We got, first of all, there, as you saw, were claims of unity from Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron. It's no secret that there are vastly differing shades of opinion within the EU going on in the background. Enough also in the short term, I guess, to reassure Italy. Obviously, this most recent crisis sparked when Italy's hardline Interior Minister Matteo Salvini started refusing the right to land to various migrant vessels. Having said that, in terms of concrete proposals, it's all still a little bit vague and voluntary. What we do have is this promise to set up asylum processing centres in various parts of the EU. We don't know exactly which countries are going to do that. And as I said, that will be voluntary. What Merkel and Macron want really is a unity across Europe on this. That doesn't really exist. What Macron wants is these so-called disembarkation centres, which would process people outside the EU, sort economic migrants from asylum seekers in countries outside EU territory. That's something which has run into hot water amongst African and North African nations. We were told at this meeting that that's something the EU will continue to work towards. Told also that there'll be a beefed up border police force and more help for Libya, which is going to be something which human rights groups will be looking at very closely. They've repeatedly expressed their concern in terms of the way people are treated in Libya as they make their way north towards the Mediterranean crossing to Italy. The Italians say they have at last not been left alone. This was also about Angela Merkel being able to say to her domestic critics, led by her own hardline interior minister, that Germany wouldn't be left alone. Yes, a lot of these new arrivals come to Italy, but many of them then go on to other countries, primarily perhaps Germany. And this issue of secondary movement is something which Merkel's critics back home wanted to see movement on.
Speaking of Merkel, she said this was a make or break moment for the EU. Did she get what she wanted?
In the short term, yes, as in she was able to sort of like portray European unity, though, as she said herself then, as I've been saying, the details do really remain to be hammered out. It was obviously threatening on one level her coalition back home because of the divisions with Horst Seehofer, her interior minister. But really the idea of countries increasingly want to do things unilaterally, taking control of their own borders, that's obviously very worrying to Angela Merkel in the way that she sees Europe, the way that she thinks Europe should operate. Is a threat potentially to what she sees as one of the EU's greatest achievements, namely the freedom of movement and the Schengen area. We did hear from Donald Tusk there saying, well, I'm sorry if you find some of these proposals a little bit hardline, but if we don't find agreement on this now, then the real tough guys will take over. And that's an acknowledgement, really, that the effects that the likes of Eastern leaders like Viktor Orban, but also Matteo Salvini, the so-called populists, are having on other Europeans in terms of migration policy.
Well, speaking of what he was just discussing, this is from the agreement, the EU migrant deal. And a quote, an emergency this is going back in time. Emergency relocation scheme was set up in 2015 with EU member states committing to relocate people from Greece and Italy to other EU countries. By July 21st, 2017, more than 24,000 people have been relocated, 16,774 from Greece and 2,675 from Italy to 24 different participating states. I mean, we could have it too. we could be part of an international, something like this, which is not, obviously not impossible because it's being done. We could actually collaborate with Europe and other places to have something like what you were calling about these open areas,
Sure.
what I'm calling the border empowerment community.
I like it. Yeah, in limited capacities, and then work out the kinks as you roll. Sure.
Well, I want to, the way that I sort of see these communities in a certain way, and I'd like to play an example of a community. I'm not trying to use this as an absolute paradigm, but it's a self-sustainable community for 40 years. And I'm thinking that if you could get people to go into a community that really train them in different skills, like in a commune, where you can do some carpentry, you can do some agriculture, you can do whatever is really needed, fix a car, where people have these crossover skills, that they could actually leave that area, go somewhere else, and now they've learned, build their own community, literally build it. Like this one at N67, Twin Oaks.
It's hard to believe, but 100 people live on this Virginia farm. Twin Oaks is, above all, tranquil.
A lot of people come here looking for utopia.
Russ McGee says it's not utopia, but he has no regrets about moving here nearly 7 years ago.
There's a certain commitment to simplicity here. You can't have a lot of travel or other cultural kind of entertainments in your life, but nonetheless, there is a great richness and connectedness to this life.
There's a place I know where you and I can go.
There is entertainment here, but life is simple. Members post notices on billboards and clipboards instead of Facebook and Twitter. And because they live in buildings that house 10 to 20, there's less privacy. But Arthur, a recent member, says that's one of the things he likes about Twin Oaks.
And I worked out in the world for 25 years in a career and lived next to somebody for 4 years and never even knew who they were. Now I live with 90 people. I know them all. It's like living in a little village, an old European village for me.
A village where everything is free. Valerie has lived here for 17 years.
We get housing, we get health care, we get food, we get clothing, plus we get $75 a month for extras, the things the community doesn't provide.
New members don't have to donate their assets to the commune. What keeps the community going is work.
Basically, the agreement is you work your 42 hours and the community covers all of your costs.
Paxis Calta says members can choose their work, and there's lots of it.
Pretty much all of the aspects of daily life that we can get away with doing here we do. We fix our own cars, we build our own buildings, we educate our own kids.
Twin Oaks also makes hammocks and tofu. Members can satisfy their 42-hour work requirement at those enterprises. Income from those businesses provides Twin Oaks with cash to purchase consumer goods like automobiles. The community owns 17 cars. Like everything else here, they are shared. And that makes Twin Oaks more environmentally friendly than most American communities.
We consume 66% less electricity, 75% less gasoline, 88% less solid waste that goes to the landfill. It comes from this sharing thing.
It's a lifestyle that's essentially communist. But most of the members who leave the community become entrepreneurs.
Ready? There.
Member Keenan Dakota.
It's ironic that here we have this communal society, and what we do is we are training future capitalists.
Take me away, boys, my time is not long.
With the community at capacity, there's a waiting list to get into Twin Oaks. Susan Logue, VOA News, Louisa, Virginia.
You know, I know. I want to hear some of your thoughts about this, but I wanted to mention that these, at a certain point, you used to call these things something like this, communes, right? But now there's actually a different name, intentional communities, which I think is a very interesting name, because there is something to this that was really great. What do you think?
I think it was perfect. I really do. I think that might be the ticket. In other words, cooperation among various communities, I think, could work. And I think one way to do that, and it might be an odd way, is to allocate. Every country allocates a portion of their country, a small piece maybe, as an international zone. Right?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
then,
that's what we're talking about, basically.
Right. And then they can collaborate between those zones and so on within the different countries in their own unique way and see how far it progresses. I love the idea.
Because I think if a person I know there's sort of miracles that happen when you take a person who is not educated and you start to give them that opportunity.
Oh, yeah,
changes and that would go not into just the kind of education you talk about, like academic, but fixing cars or doing carpentry.
Right.
Most people, middle-class people, don't experience anything like that anymore.
Right.
But if you could train a person on all kinds of levels, you could take these refugees and suddenly they're in an advanced curriculum of being able to sustain themselves and their community. I think would be very interesting and very important. So not to be focused on the specifics of any one intentional community as border empowerment, as a empowerment community would be an area where countries, corporations, and universities would in effect create villages designed to expeditiously educate refugees in the skills necessary to create and build their own self-reliant communities instead of tent cities. So you have all these tent cities and all this crap all over the world, and I see those people as assets. If they could give them something to do to make themselves better, and so they're actually creating a profit instead of just taking everything from other people because they have nothing to build on. These zones would function to create resources where countries and corporations could pool existing talent in these zones. So they're here in this empowerment or international zone, and they're being looked at by corporations and by other businesses. And what happens is, okay, so one company will actually install a physics laboratory and training place, and they teach maybe a small number of people how to become, physicists or mechanical engineers. So certain people would be sort of picked out and specially trained. Other people would get a more general training, but also people would be recruited from these groups because these groups would be have a dedicated skills that would be enhanced on purpose, so that companies throughout the world can recruit them, and then they'd have a place to go temporarily or permanently.
I like it. Yeah. Sort
of interesting.
Very interesting.
What I wanted to say also, looking at this idea, here's some criteria, which is another. I want to get to one thing pretty quick because it has something to do with what you said before, not in a private conversation. First of all, the economy needs to be bottom up. Without compromising the value of prosperity, it should ensure that all members of whatever social order that are in the game should be given the absolute opportunity to provide for themselves and their family. So that's the opposite of what's going on.
Right.
To this end, technology should be deployed at its most foundational level that is good for the earth and its population, but not leveraged to profit the few, but to provide clean, inexpensive energy, for instance, for the many. This is a radical change from the kind of technology we use today. The dependence on such vital technology on petroleum leads to continual war and the artificial enrichment of certain corporations and individuals. Predatory technology affects almost every facet of human life: food supply, air and water pollution, medical and health solutions, transportation. Now, remember you told me you were talking about how the government should provide jobs for everyone, right?
I think that should be always one of the goals of the government. Yeah.
Did you know? I think I can't pronounce her name, Ocasio-Cortez, the woman who won the in New York State. She won the House of Representatives.
Social liberal.
Social Democrat. Okay. But did you know that one of her goals is to have that? One of her specific goals.
That I didn't know. Wow.
Yeah.
Good on her.
One of them is it's called a federal job guarantee. Now, I'm not saying I agree with all of this, but I'm going to read to you what she actually put in her platform. A federal jobs guarantee would create a baseline quality for employment that guarantees a $15 wage pegged to inflation, full health care, and paid child and sick leave for all. This proposal would dramatically upgrade the quality of employment in the United States by providing training and experience to workers while bringing much needed public services to our communities in areas such as park service, childcare, and environmental conservation. Furthermore, a federal jobs guarantee program would establish a floor for wages and benefits for the nation's workforce. This program would provide a baseline, again, of $15 an hour and guarantee for public workers a basic benefits package, including health care and child care. By investing in our own workforce, we can lift thousands of American families out of poverty. So that's
interesting lady.
She was attacked, and before, she was attacked as soon as when people found out she won, they were truly horrified.
Well, did she win? The question is, remember that the DNC
she won the primary,
but then the DNC took away the extra votes and spread it across the other two. Candidates and tied it up, and now there's going to be some form of a vote off.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think that could be fake news. It might have been fake news I was reading. I didn't follow up on that like I should have.
She was against one person, and that person was he was fourth in line to be Speaker of the House.
Right.
Anyway, another component of this, that economic planning would have to be very complex since business functions on different levels in municipalities and something like counties and states and provinces and countries on a global scale. Because I think if you're going to do cooperative capitalism, it's going to be, you can imagine all these corporations are sitting down and trying to figure out how to beat everybody else. I think it gets a little more difficult when they're trying not to beat everyone else, but to make sure that everybody else is okay. And it's a totally different approach. The idea was that if you do that, everything will be fine. And people who gain a lot of money, it's going to be great. But it doesn't work that way.
Well, it's the ownership of these companies. You got massive wealth controlled by just a few, and they're out for themselves. Again, it comes back to, the main controllers of these corporations and what their decisions are. And corporations, these people that head up the corporations, kind of like President Trump heads up the Corporation of America, their duty is to enrich that entity. That's really their duty. They applied for it and they got the job, and now they're proceeding to carry out the terms of that job. Mm-hmm. It's unfortunate because that's the way it is in corporate business. How do we change that?
I think we have to change it from the bottom up.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you, Don, for today. This was exciting. Both the part where we do get into a little combativeness and the part that we get into a little bit of cooperation. I'm sure both of us will try to win the other person over, but I don't know what the chances are. I want to thank your brother also for helping us see the multiple advantages of working with PBS Radio. We're trying to learn everything that we can that he's taught us. And then we want to thank Hassan Khan, who's done so much for me in New Galaxy Enterprises. Lynn, the Mystic Healer, who calls in.
We love you, Lynn.
Also has been trying to help us get connections so that we know where the next level of people are that would be able to help us. And Andy Miller has done a lot because he's actually helping the first stages of building this infrastructure, La Planète.
Yeah, they're
so
great.
It's really good.
Yeah.
So we're gonna say goodbye now, and we'll do the INF 2. It's called the INF 2 Extra, and M24, a great song for us that leave. Thanks for joining Don Newsom and I on Inalienable and Free, Voice of the Coalition. As we go about developing our new organization, the Coalition for Planetary Empowerment, we hope you will consider the importance of taking part in the electoral processes of your government and asserting the rights you have to vote for the companies you respect and love by casting your ballot as a shareholder or as a consumer with what you buy. We hope soon to make this possible through a social network responsive to your needs through dialogue about your rights as a citizen, but also to be able to effectively act in concert with like-minded colleagues who find representatives of government and business executives who will hear your voice and appreciate your message. See you soon.
The best things in life are free.